thank you for everybody for joining us today, and I expect and wish a fruitful discussion which will enrich our work together on the innovation in Tanzania and towards the 2021 Global Innovation Index report. Thank you all, and karibuni sana.
Asante sana, Dr. Nungu. Thank you very much. I think it goes without saying that everyone, all 55.5 million of us, are extremely happy about the ranking and the fact that we keep climbing. And I think that really goes to show the intent and effort that the ecosystem players put into growing our ecosystem. So thank you very much for opening the discussion and welcoming us, Dr. Nungu. Up next, we have a force to be reckoned with, Natalie Smith, who is the Deputy Team Lead for the Human Investment Team at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Natalie, we're really curious to hear about your reflections and the reflections of development partners on the progress that we see in our ecosystem. Welcome.
Thank you, Catherine Rose, and thank you very much, Dr. Nungu and COSTECH, as well as HDIF, for hosting us for the webinar today. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of the UK government and talking on behalf of development partners about the report. I'm not going to speak for long, but I wanted to highlight two kind of big messages from the report, I think, and then three kind of reflections that made me have on our role as development partners. And perhaps what that means we need to be doing more of or doing differently. And I would love to hear others' reaction to that as we come into the panel and the discussion. So as for the kind of two big messages that really struck me from the report, the first is, just again, what a fantastic performance this is for Tanzania, and just enormous congratulations to everybody involved in this in the ecosystem. So with COSTECH's leadership. But everybody, from the innovators to those who are involved in hub spaces to those involved in the programming side. Not only we've heard Tanzania has jumped several places again to 88th place, this is continued year on year. There's been this continued progress. So I think we can kind of take heart that this is a trend that we're seeing in Tanzania. And I was just so impressed to see that Tanzania ranks first of all low-income countries on the index this year and fourth in terms of sub-Saharan African countries. And I think we really need to take time to celebrate just how impressive that is. Like, I think if you were to ask somebody on the street or who's a little bit involved in global innovation, where globally in Africa do you think would be the kind of top performing spaces in terms of innovation? Probably you'd hear things like maybe Nigeria, Rwanda, but actually you see Tanzania is the country that's up there. So South Africa and Mauritius, I think, have joined first, then Kenya, then Tanzania. That is incredibly impressive, and it also, very much reflects my own anecdotal experience from being a partner of the Tanzania innovation ecosystem for the last 3 years now. I think you do increasingly see, people are on top of their game, and there's real energy, excitement. We see that every year in Innovation Week. The numbers of people who are coming out to get excited and to collaborate on innovation is incredible. So my number one message is just massive congratulations to everybody for this fantastic achievement. The second thing that I wanted to pick up on from the report, and it's not so much in the Tanzania report, but globally, just what a year 2020 has been, and the impact that's having on innovation, and the impact that innovation is having on our current circumstances. So I think, we've seen in 2020 so many people from across different sectors, be that the health sector in response to COVID-19, the education sector with the closure of schools around the world, recognizing the potential of innovation and technology in a way that we haven't seen it to such a degree before. But equally, and it comes out really strongly in the global report, the global economic consequences of the COVID pandemic and what we're seeing are likely to have an impact, a concerning impact on financing for innovation. So it's really, I think, an imperative for all of us to think about how do we take this moment in terms of innovation for Tanzania? How do we take the opportunity of the increased global recognition of the value of innovation technology, but also the reality in terms of the potential impact on financing? So those are my two observations on the trends, and then briefly 3 things in terms of what it made me think of as a development partner. So I think as many of you will know, as the UK, we've been partnering with Tanzania on innovation for the last sort of 7 years. We've invested about £40 million in the innovation ecosystem through the HDIF programme, and that's coming to an end next year, and we're moving as development partners really to a new phase of partnership with Tanzania on innovation. So it's also a really relevant time for us to reflect. And as I say, the kind of 3 reflections I had, one was, I think there's more that we could be doing as international development partners with our international networks and connections to really champion Tanzania as an amazing space for innovation, to really help that story get out there of the incredible kind of consistent progress that Tanzania is making on innovation, and on the what an exciting space this is. I note particularly that Tanzania's strong performance comes around creative exports, and you see that living in Dar. You see the creativity and the energy, and I think just doing a little bit more of championing and communicating that globally is something that I'd like to see us more as development partners picking up on. The second thing, and as CR you've covered, the theme of this report this year is around finance. Let me get the phrasing right. Who will finance innovation? And I think we're, as development partners, we're conscious that in Tanzania, we're very keen to be supporting and financing partners of innovation, but there's pros and cons to that. As development partner finance, we're keen to be there as supporters of the ecosystem, but equally, when you come in with financing, that also has an impact on the market and on the innovation space. So I think increasingly we need to be thinking about what are all the different parts of the financing landscape for innovation in Tanzania. How do we work together and collaborate more? How do we enable fora for that communication to happen? And I hope this conversation is part of that. To kind of not be separate streams, the development space and then the private sector space, but how do we look and map out how all of those things work together? So that was my second reflection. And then the final reflection was just how we also increasingly need to see innovation tied into every aspect of what we as development partners are doing, governments are doing, people are doing in their day-to-day lives. So integrating innovation throughout, whether it's our agriculture programming, our education programming, and similarly in terms of national development planning. I think we've all been talking about that for a long time. We're all making efforts towards it. But with, as I say, this shift this year of us all becoming much more comfortable with Zoom and webinars, I think there's a real opportunity to embrace the optimism about innovation and technology, and much more clearly bring our focus on innovation and tech into the rest of our sectors. So looking forward to kind of picking up on those conversations, hearing if you agree or disagree when we come to the panel discussions. And again, thanks very much everyone for hosting.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I hear 2 questions already that I think I will prompt our panel on. One was, how do we streamline innovation into our programming, and not just, in terms of what we're doing in private sector, but private sector, public sector, and donors as well. And then how do we close that gap? So I think this is definitely something we will work on addressing and have some great discussions around during our panel discussion. So to take us into a deep dive into the report, and focusing on the process and recommendations for improved rankings, I would now like to invite Ms. Lorena Rivera-Leon, who is an economist within the Global Innovation Index in the Department of Economics and Data Analytics. Welcome, Lorena, to Tanzania.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Well, I want to start by thanking the organizers, HDIF, but also my colleague and director of the Department for Africa and Least Developed Countries in WIPO, Mr. Mark Sericor, for joining us today. It has been a very nice surprise to be in contact with you guys and all the work you are doing around our report. We work with a lot of countries, and we're always very happy to actually see that the report is being used in the correct way. So what I'm going to do now, also knowing that the colleagues from HCIF will go in depth into the results, and that most of the audience know very well about the report, I will just focus on the process, how we came about it, how it is used by countries, how do we use the data, how we collect it, and so on. So as Catherine said, I work in the Department of Economics. I am in charge of doing within WIPO all the statistical work that goes into the computation of the rankings. So a lot of the nitty-gritty, but also getting in contact with countries and disseminating all the work we do. As part of our work as well is to work with the outreach and technical advice. So as we take part in this webinar, since we launched the report last week, we've been engaging with many other governments that are actually using the report to guide their innovation strategies. So I'm going to share just a few slides. Please let me know if you can see them. Can you see them?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's great. So basically, yeah, I just want to give a very quick introduction of what the GII is. So basically, the GII is a ranking, but the most important part of the GII is actually the data that is behind the ranking. Our aim is actually to give insightful data on innovation to policymakers, so that policymakers can use this data to evaluate their innovation performance and to have more informed decision-making processes based on this data. So we have seen through the years, this is the 13th year we produce the GII, and we have been the impact of the report in 3 different fronts. First of all, we see more and more economies around the world using the GII as a yardstick in a way. So they set into their agendas objectives to reach X or Y ranking, but having in mind that reaching a specific target is actually part of their strategy. And here also recognizing that innovation is one element and that is an horizontal element that goes into the whole economic policy agenda of a country. I will go into what makes a country successful in the ranking later, but just to say that successful countries actually have a very clear understanding that innovation doesn't work in a silo, it's part of really a whole agenda, a whole of government agenda. Now, the GII also allows economies, as I said, to use their ranking as a benchmark and to track their innovation performance. Again, being aware that whatever is reflected in the data is part of some implementation at the policy level and on the ground. So here I'm also very keen on the discussion that will come after, because we see some things in the data, but we're actually always interested in the stories that are behind this data. And it's interesting that Natalie said about the creativity aspect. So everything that we always say that there is a story behind each of the indicators. So I'm actually keen on listening to these stories. And finally, the third point was initially what we thought a collateral of the report. And now more and more we see it as one of the core objectives. And it's really the understanding by countries that collecting data is actually very important in the process of understanding their position in their ecosystem, not only locally, but also globally. And by collecting better data, they're able to prioritize and give more impetus to their own economies. So that's also our third aim. Now, I want to clarify that this is a collaboration project. We work in the WIPO in collaboration with Cornell University and INSEAD. and also some knowledge partners, which is partners that had been engaged for several years using the GII very actively in their countries, but also in promoting the framework. And this year we collaborate with the Confederation of Indian Industry, with the System, and with the National Confederation of Industry in Brazil. And also our statistical model is every year audited by an external auditor. And we've been working with the Competence Center on Composite Indicators and Scoreboards of the JRC of the European Commission for over 10 years now. And you can find the more technical audit of our report in our website. Basically, it goes as an appendix every year. If you're interested in knowing how the calculations go, how these are robust, and so on and so forth, this is covering this statistical audit. And finally, we have an international advisory board. And this year it is composed of 17 leading practitioners from all over the world. And we rely on their inputs as well to improve the framework and to make it more updated to the always changing definition of innovation. I know you will go more in depth on the framework further down into the webinar, but this is just to put a bit of portrait of how we measure innovation in the GII. So also knowing that measuring innovation is a very complex thing. But I think here I could, to make it a little bit simple, we have what we call the inputs and outputs of the innovation ecosystem. So on the input side, you have what is on the left. We divide our framework in different pillars and sub-pillars. So we have 5 pillars on the input side. And in here, you can see that our definition is much more, it takes a more holistic approach in the sense that innovation also requires strong institutions, a very good political environment, regulatory environment, and business environment. It requires human capital that fuels all the system, and in particular the education and tertiary education systems, but also the R&D system, infrastructure, of course, and then the sophistication of the markets and businesses. And in here we measure aspects such as the access to credit, the access to investment, how open is an economy to trade and competition, how large are the markets. And in terms of sophistication, we see how knowledge intensive are the workforce, how the ecosystem is linked with each other. So what are these linkages between the public and private sectors? And then how is this knowledge created in the ecosystem absorbed? And then we understand that these inputs are enabling actually the production of outcomes. And in this case, we have 2 output pillars, knowledge and technology outputs, where we have some variables on intellectual property, but also how knowledge is created thanks to these inputs, how it is the impact of this knowledge, not only locally, but also worldwide, and how the knowledge that is created nationally is diffused around the world. And finally, our pillar 7, it's on the more creativity elements. And in here also, the aim was to recognize that there's a lot of intangible assets that goes into innovation that are not necessarily technocentric, but there's a lot of more softer variables and creativity variables that need to be accounted for. And here we have measures on online creativity, but also on creative goods and services. Now, how do we produce it in a nutshell? Here I'm going more into the details, but I think this slide is to show the complexity of how the model, the statistical model, is calculated. And basically, just to clarify that all the data that goes into the index is not collected by us as organizations, WIPO. We actually rely on tertiary data that is produced by other international organizations, but also private bodies, as I will go more in depth. we don't collect data directly from governments. We rely on the quality processes of international organizations to collect this data. So these are all the data providers that went into the calculation of the GII 2020. We use data from international organizations such as UNESCO, UNIDO, the WTO, but also from private sectors, such as this year we introduced a new variable on the value of brands. And
sorry, if I could interrupt you, could you project in full screen so we can see
your... Okay. I thought I was on full screen. I'm sorry.
No, no worries. We're so engrossed
now. Yeah, you're right. Okay. There you go. You were seeing my notes before. Sorry about that.
No, so it's so there should be a toggle at the bottom where it asks you for full screen.
Okay, let me see.
So just the one you're pointing up before?
The one that looks like a screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
The third one, yes, perfect.
Is it that one? Can you see it? There. No. I actually can see it in my screen, but I don't think you can.
Can you go into display settings?
Yes.
And turn off presenter view. Up at the top, upper left hand, the center toggle, display settings, and turn off presenter view.
Okay. There?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
thank you.
Perfect. There it goes. So yeah, this is basically an image that shows all the data providers. So this is a mix of public and private sector. I was mentioning that this year we introduced a new variable on the value of brands from Brand Finance, which is a private sector provider, but we also use Clarivate Analytics, IHS Market, Suknik, PwC data for the entertainment and media market, and so on. Yeah, so this is just to show a little bit of the complexity. App Annie as well for the production of mobile apps around the world. So those 80 indicators can actually be framed within 3 categories. We have 58 indicators that are what we call hard data, which is come from private and public sources. Then we have composite indicators or index data, and this comes from a variety of other international organizations. And here, for example, we have the World Bank, the UN Public Administration Network, but also Yale and Columbia universities for the Environmental Performance Index, to give an example. And we have 4 indicators that are soft data or come from a survey. And this is the World Economics Forum Executive Opinion Survey. And it's just basically to try to cover areas as well that are not very well covered by hard data. And we use this survey as a way to understanding these parts of the ecosystem as well. So you mentioned before, Catherine, is there actually a recipe to see countries go up? This is a question that we actually see continuously in our discussions with governments. And basically, with time, we have come with a few key points that I think is important for all countries that use the index as a framework of their own performance analysis, is that basically innovation is actually a key priority that should be embedded in a clear innovation policy path. And when we see the countries that have gone up the rankings very fast, and I give examples that, you know, it's a lot of middle-income countries and emerging economies, mainly Asian economies this year, such as China, the Philippines, Vietnam. All of these countries have a very clear innovation policy. And innovation policy in a very horizontal way. It's not an IP policy that is standing alone. It's something that it's coordinated with the education ministries, the industry ministries, and so on and so forth. So in a way, these governments have set up cross-ministerial task forces to pursue innovation policy in this whole government approach. Then, on top of that, these cross-ministerial task forces have a very active role in interacting with the ecosystem. So this interaction with other private and public sector stakeholders is very important as well. So it's not only this top-level approach, but it's all this interaction between everybody involved in the ecosystem. So that I think it's very promising that there are all these organizations and institutions sitting around the table today, because this is exactly the kind of interactions we see in other successful economies. And then obviously being able to actually quantify progress. And by this, I don't mean tracking the ramping up in the GII rankings themselves, but also having within their policy targets very clear policy objectives and actions that are actually quantifiable and that can be continuously evaluated as well. So these are kind of like some successful things that countries do. Now, what we've seen that countries do badly as well. So some of the don'ts are basically actually quite easy. Not setting very over ambitious and unrealistic targets. And this, for example, we see some countries setting, they're in the down tier of the ranking, and they set up to be an innovation leader in the next 5 years. That's basically over ambitious and unrealistic. So it's better to see this progressive ramping up. It's better to have a few ranks up every year, and we actually get worried when there is a huge jump in the rankings, because there's a lot of we get more worried about the data reliability in that case. We are more happy to see when countries go step by step and little by little. The other thing is, like, don't set over expectations with regards to how policy changes can affect the performance, because these changes don't happen instantaneously. So the tricky part about innovation policy is that it's a long-term engagement. So don't expect to see changes in the ranking right away. It's better to see this step-by-step mathematical way, progressive way in a way. And another thing is, like, we've seen a lot of countries as well hiring this big group of consultants trying to understand why am I going up one and it missing data, what does it mean, and so on. So basically, the GII is indeed a statistical model, but it shouldn't be taken as a mathematical exercise, because there's so many things that are interlinked within the metrics, but also within the specific innovation ecosystems that shouldn't be treated as a straight mathematical, statistical exercise. And just to finish, something else that we have seen in successful countries is that the focus should not be on these year-to-year changes alone. There's a lot of, and we're very clear also in our methodology, there's a lot of things that can influence year-to-year changes. What should be a more comprehensive way, or a better use of our index, is to set objectives that go over several years on a multi-year framework. So set, like, for example, a target to go into 3 to 5 years, which can be very challenging because of the policy cycles that every country go into, and so on and so forth. But this is the right way to focus on this progress, to see it more as a long-term goal. And I think I will leave it there. I'm more curious now to hear the discussions, and of course, if there are questions more specific on the process or on anything related to the index, I will be very happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Lorena. So there's so much to think about in terms of where we are, where we want to go. This 3 to 5 year plan, I think, really lays out our next discussion in the tangible steps that will take us there. We had 2 questions that came in via the chat, and I'm wondering if you can take a couple of minutes to address them.
Yeah.
One is there a way to prioritize the ingredients for the recipe? So what should we be looking at? And I'm sure you get this question a lot. And the second one is, are there any specific sectors that we need to be thinking about, that play key roles in terms of index improvement? So is it tech? Is it agriculture? Is there anything we can focus on as Tanzania to be thinking about over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, these are very interesting questions, actually. And I think my first recommendation from a non-Tanzania expert, to be very frank, is to start by looking at 2 aspects of the index. We try to summarize the strengths and weaknesses of every ecosystem, and in there, I think an analysis of whether you recognize these strengths and where exactly should be probably your starting point, to see, do I recognize the country here? Which are the sectors linked to this? Can we explain actually these top ranks in the system? Now the second part is obviously also the weaknesses, and here is the tricky part, because the weaknesses can come into very complex parts of the ecosystem, such as the business environment or the political environment, and this is where it's less evident what kind of strategies could be set. Now, in terms of sectors, I think the best way is to really try to look at the different indicators and try to actually link them to a specific activities. And from here, I think I will rely more on your actual knowledge on the field to try and disentangle this information. But one of the, if I can say, the long-hanging fruit would be to look at the strengths and weaknesses part. Also look at the missing and outdated data. And I think probably Joseph will go more in detail in there. It is important for us to encourage countries to actually try to fulfill the missing data, because it might be that some of the ranks can be explained simply by things not being quantifiable. And this should also be a priority, to try to understand why this data is missing, who is responsible to actually send it to the international organizations, what is the process internally to actually go through that, and on the basis of this, try to see if with better data you can actually achieve a better ranking. That's what we see in actually several countries. The outdated data as well is something important, because as I said before, this we produce now the 2020 index, but this is in most cases based on 2018 data. But if some of the data we use for your computations are from 2016, 2015, then we're probably not basically translating properly what are the realities in the country right now. So I think these 3 areas are probably the easiest one, or the ones to begin with. And what we see with countries is, like, once you start kind of grasping into the details, you actually realize what are the priority sectors, what are the priority issues, what should you be focusing on.
Thank you so much, Lorena. I'm so happy you're with us for the rest of the afternoon, because I envision there will be more comments and questions to come your way. Perfect. So to take it into, to set the stage actually for our panel discussion, I'd like to invite Joseph Manirakiza, who is the Country Director for the Human Development Innovation Fund, to share his insights into the report.
Well, thanks, Catherine Rose. Let me just also try to project. just a few slides. Great. I hope that can be seen by everybody, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So thanks for everyone for joining us today as we announced that we partnered with the Commission of Science and Technology. Dr. Nungu, thank you for opening this webinar for us. And I think it's an important report actually to start discussing and see actually what it means for Tanzania, because we can't just sit back and be happy about, we've progressed and then what. So that's why I think it's very important to actually discuss this particular report and see what actually can be done to even progress further. So what I'm going to do is not just to go through what everyone has already mentioned. I think we have gotten like very good remarks from everyone who has spoken before. And thanks, Lorena, for actually going through the process and the way with this report is actually produced, because it's going to set a very good background for the discussion that we're going to proceed. So I'm just going to do a highlight of what probably people have already seen, but this is just to set the tone for the discussion that's going forward by our amazing panelists. That one, we are ranked 88th globally. That's out of 131 countries that have been surveyed for this particular report. What does that exactly mean? Yes, we are number 4 in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's actually something really good to be proud of, given that we are actually ahead of some countries that are probably seen to be more innovative than we are. So great, but what does it mean? Does it translate to the actual reality on the ground? So I'm actually eager to hear from our great panelists when they start now talking about this. Also, the other thing is that we are in the group of achievers where the innovation actually is higher, above the expectations. So we need to discuss like, okay, what does it mean and what can I actually do to go even higher? I think Lorena has already addressed that we actually do better when it comes to creative goods and export. I think Natalie has also touched on that. One point that was of key interest to me is a remark that is in the report about Tanzania benefiting from a relatively interlinked innovation ecosystem, international connectivity, and strong university industry research. That's a very interesting remark, and probably I would like to hear from Professor Mwamila later on, because he's another academician. I think even Dr. Flora has been actually in this. Probably there are some of the things that we actually do not see when we are in the ecosystem. So it's actually good to see it coming out there. It can actually evoke some of the discussion. But one thing that I've noticed in this report, if you look at the way we are ranked in terms of inputs index and output index, it looks like Tanzania invest little but get more out of it. That we are number 112 on innovation inputs compared to number 67 innovation output. Is that being very efficient in the way we actually use our investment? Or what does that exactly mean? Do we have to go back and see whether we can actually do better in terms of investing in the ecosystem? I think all those are questions that probably should actually be looked at very closely. I had to look at the trend in terms of performance, like looking from 2016, where we started tracking this Tanzania performance back in 2015, but at least looking at the way we have been going, I think it's very fascinating to see how we have been making progress. I think Natalie touched on that as well. It would be great to actually go back and look at what have we actually been doing to be progressively performing better this way, and what can actually be done better based on the do's and don'ts that have been shared before. So this is something that I think it gives us a very good picture to see where we start from, right? And I don't have to go deep into the strengths and weaknesses. I think for those who have gone through the report can actually see them. But as Dr. Nu always put it, that this report, it's a feedback to us, and it kind of gives us pointers of where we should actually start from. To look at the weaknesses, I think there are some of the things that really should be looked at very closely. The human capital in the research sub-index is always something that keeps on coming. I think we always score low on this particular one. it's good that we have some experts on the panel. Professor Mwamila, again, this is going to go your way. Definitely, I think Catherine has got good questions for you. The same with, I think, Dr. Flora. But also for others also who actually interact with these people, because even if you're in the hub space, if you are an investor, if you are a startup, you are going to need people of high caliber. So the fact that we rank low in the human capital research or business sophistication or knowledge and technology, that's something that we need to look at very closely. On the strength, I think that's based on how we've been progressing, but I think it's also very important to look at how can we even strengthen further. So that's something that we need to go. Because to me, when you look at in the weaknesses, I think something that had been pointed out earlier is about, the unavailability of data or data which is outdated. As Dr. Nung always puts it, these are the things that actually, these are low-hanging fruit that can actually be immediately corrected if we can actually work together with several institutions that are tasked of provide this kind of information. Or you look at something like Wikipedia edits. I remember that some hubs that are used to organize like sessions to actually update information on Wikipedia about Tanzania. To me, I think this is something that the ecosystem could actually come together. So okay, we can actually improve this within no time. So I think these are the things that we need to look at this report more critically and see where we can actually improve. And of course, depend on now the other policy environment to address the most critical ones. Some key observations before I give place. I don't want to take time for the panel discussion. In terms of, if you look at the GDP from the report, provide that Tanzania performance is above the expected level of its development, which well, sometimes I think that also can be debated, like should countries with lower GDP be less innovative than countries with higher GDP? Shouldn't it be the other way around, that because you have a higher development needs, you should actually develop you should innovate much faster and harder than a developed country? Because, so that it's just, it can be just a rhetoric question, but it's a very important point of discussion as well. I've already addressed the issue of missing data, which is something that we can immediately address. We have talked about creative outputs being like our strong point, but human capital research being our weak point. I think that's something that everyone has pointed out that we need probably to discuss further. So just one thing that I think Natalie has raised about when it comes to financing. I don't want to touch on that because we have experts in the panel to discuss the financing landscape. But there has been a very important question within the ecosystem, like who should actually be financing innovation? So it really depends on what we mean by that. But because, there are development partners who are being putting in money, but moderately focusing on social development needs, that's fine. But we have also the other side of innovation, which is very important for the economy of the country, the startups. Where do startups need to get financing from? One of our experts on the panel, Salum Awad, always said that money is not a problem. My question to me is always like, okay, so how come startups don't get access to that money? So it depends whether it's a problem or not. I think it depends on the nature of the money which is available, right? So that I would like to hear more about that from Salum, especially now reflecting on this report. Or we have people who are actually in the ecosystem, in the startup ecosystem, like Faith and Mrusha. Maybe you can also reflect on this. As to what's going to fall, especially when it comes to financing, I think we are also at HDF, we are partnering with other development partners, UNDP and others, to actually explore the better way of putting in place some kind of facility or financing mechanism which can actually be sustainable. So that's something that we can work on, because that's which has been coming up in the discussion we'll be having in the ecosystem. So lastly, I've seen that when we started putting this, inviting people for this webinar, there has been a very interesting discussion on Twitter, on social media, which is very healthy, about, where are the startups in this? Where are the innovators in these kind of discussions? Some people are saying, where it's high time that actually startups, innovators start speaking for themselves rather than investors and other specific people. I totally agree with them. This report is quite complex. It's very important, touching on so many stakeholders. And what I propose to people who are having that discussion, like maybe we should have another session looking at particular needs of certain sections within the ecosystem to actually digest it further to see whether this progress that we're making is actually translating to the result on the ground for that particular group of people. So I'm actually welcoming other partners to kind of engage this kind of discussion because it's a healthy one. It's going to give us key pointers to our policymakers to see where to focus, and also get very valuable input from the ecosystem also to help in this kind of discussions. So without further ado, thank you very much everyone for joining us. So I think we should all wait to hear from the panel discussion that Catherine is going to facilitate. Asante sana, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Joe. So what I heard from you very clearly coming out was that all this Twitter chatter that we've been seeing the entire day around where are the innovators and where are the startups is something that HTIP wants to engage in and wants to have hard conversations around that and how do we remove the bottlenecks. So you've heard it straight from Joe, from the country director of the Human Development Innovation Fund. The doors are open at HTIP for this discussion. If you're interested in having this discussion and being part of this, please drop your name into the chat so we can make sure we get you. But I think this is definitely something that we will be taking forward and really drilling deeper and examining because we want to be able to move up. We want to be able to use Lorena's recipe book for success, right? To be able to move us up the ranking and have a larger impact as well as innovators. So I think now we'll get into the good stuff. It's been good stuff, but now we're going to do an even deeper dive. And we're not just looking at our ecosystem, but we have an incredible panel that is spread out across the continent with global and regional experience. We have Professor Mwamila, who is a seasoned academician and innovation enthusiast. Professor Mwamila, in case you didn't know, is the former founding vice chancellor of the Nelson Mandela African Institute of Science and Technology. Welcome, Professor Mwamila. We have Dr. Flora Tibarazwa, who you might know when she was at COSTECH previously. Flora now sits in a regional and global role as a program director at the Southern African Innovation Support Program, SICE. In case you didn't know, there is a new call out for SICE currently for innovators and startups, so check them out on their social media. It's definitely something that I think would be interesting for our ecosystem. We have Salom Awad, no stranger to innovation talks, I think, and always has incredible insights about finance. Welcome, Salom. Salom is the CEO of SSC Capital and the founding chair of the Tanzania Angel Investors Network. We have Jones Mrusha, who is a seasoned innovator and tech enthusiast, and also founder and non-executive director of Hub 255. Welcome, Jones. And we also have with us tonight Faith Pella. Faith wears several hats, and we're really excited to have you here, Faith, because I think you bring grounding on several levels to our panel. Faith is the head of mobile financial services at Tigo and a board member of the Tanzania Startup Association and co-founder of Kilimo Fresh Foods Africa. Welcome, everyone. Once again, if you have questions for any of our panelists, any of our speakers today, please drop them into the chat function or into the Q&A section. And please do remember to tweet. So we've heard a plethora of information this afternoon. We've heard that we are performing better in innovation outputs than innovation inputs in 2020. We've heard that our ranking is higher than last year. We've heard that we are ranked first amongst the 16 low-income group economies. We've heard that also we're rejoining the group of innovation achievers this year as part of a select group of economies whose innovation performance is above expectations for its level of development. And we've also heard that as a country, our ecosystem is really benefiting from closely interlinked, our ecosystem wanted, international connectivity, strong university industry research, and collaboration and cluster development. And so we're going to be taking a deep dive into all of these areas, both the strengths and the weaknesses this afternoon. And what I'd really like to focus on right at the beginning is if our panelists can just take a couple of minutes to reflect on what your key takeaways are from the report, one or two key takeaways. Should we be comfortable with the progress we've made so far? or should we step up our game and work harder? And what does it mean for innovators and stakeholders on the ground? So I'm going to go to Professor Mwamila, please. Can we? Sorry, Professor, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I wish to thank HDIF and COSTECH for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I am excited, and I'm very happy to be able to share with you my feelings about the GII report. When I looked at the report, I was very impressed by Tanzania's performance. And I noted that, in fact, during the last 5 years, Tanzania's performance has been has been improving, except for 2019, when there was some kind of trend distortion, if one may say. And then I was also very happy to notice that Tanzania ranked highest, but then it was being considered as one of the low-income countries. Now, with Tanzania now having graduated into the lower middle-income countries, I was wondering what that means. However, when I looked at the score, I noted that we probably would come immediately below Kenya if we were to be taken in that group. It is very, very impressive to note that we are fourth among 26 sub-Saharan African countries, and above us, South Africa, Mauritius, and Kenya, which means, yes, Tanzania can actually do better. And I am even more convinced that we can do better, especially if we address the weaknesses that have been identified. And when you look at the weaknesses, you note that one of the areas where Tanzania has shown weaknesses in the area of human capital and research. And this happens to be the area where I think I'm most conversant with, because it has to do with education generally, tertiary education, research and development. And over the years, I've dealt with issues related to this. When you look at the details, the specific areas, when you look at the specific areas where Tanzania is weak, you note under education, there is the pupil-teacher ratio, for instance, the so-called school life expectancy. Under teacher education, it's teacher enrollment, and graduates, especially in science and engineering. And here I would like to say, yes, over the years, we noticed that I think we've been making a lot of noise about it, and the government has done a lot to improve, so that when you look at the figures years back and what is happening now, there is significant improvement in teacher education. And since teacher education improvement, expansion of teacher education depends on very much what is happening below, of course, we are hoping that we definitely will be seeing a lot more improvement with the implementation of no fees for primary and secondary education. The numbers are going to go up, and therefore we're going to see enrollment in teacher education improve. There has been also a lot of, the government has paid quite some attention in the areas of science, and therefore I'm hoping to see a improvement in graduates in science and engineering. With those improvements, then one hopes that, because it follows more or less from the same, there is also going to be improvement in research and development, because research and development performance is a function of the level of education of the population. With the level of education of the population enhanced, then of course we're going to see improvement. When it comes to research, where universities and higher learning institutions are the key players on the ground. I think the performance has not been very good, although now we are seeing quite some improvement. When you compare to the way the situation has been during the last maybe 10 years, there's been quite improvement. But I would say we still need to see more being in happening in that area. And one of the factors affecting that is the financing of research. The government has done a lot to improve its financing of R&D, but when it comes to that, even institutions have a duty to mobilize resources from international financing agencies. And here I think probably universities still have to do a lot more when it comes to developing capacity to put up, to compete for financing from the international funding agencies. Often when calls are made, we are informed the responses from Tanzania have not been as, as many as, from some of our neighbors, for instance. But I think the ability to respond depends on the capacity to actually put up competitive proposal. And here I would say, when it comes to saying what is it that we should do, I'll be talking about that. I think we need to see universities and other higher learning institutions put more effort in improving their capacities to put up to compete for funding from up there. When it comes to ranking, which is in a way also a function of, among other things, the performance in research, I think we'll probably see improvement if performance in performance in research improves. Knowledge and technology outputs, where again universities have a big role to play. I think when it comes to patenting and IP generally, patents and IP generally, our performance has not been very good. Probably Kostek would be better placed to say something about that. I think we need to do more to encourage people to register patents and so forth. Those doing research, and of course the universities should also promote that more seriously. When it comes to impact, knowledge impact, again, we provide knowledge to students, and then we generate knowledge, and then this has to have impact. There has been some improvement. I think that is an area where more has been similarly for knowledge diffusion. And innovation linkages, it's true, I think it has been mentioned, we are university industry linkages are probably better in Tanzania than in some other places, and there we seem to be faring well. It is true over the years there's been quite some emphasis by higher learning institutions in that area. University or a college or whatever it is, linkage with industry has been given quite some attention. And I think that is what we are seeing here is the outcome of those efforts. International connectivity, for many of the main universities, this has been given quite some attention. And I think the performance there has been very, very good. But there are institutions which are not performing as well, and therefore there's still more room for improvement. Now,
thank you, Professor Mwamila.
Yes.
If I may, there's a couple of things I just want to make sure that we capture before we go to our next panelist, is that I think we need to definitely take a deeper dive into what you really rightly raised, which is around patenting. And, what can we do in that area and IP, and definitely some more tangible ways to deep dive again into the skills area, which we will definitely get into. So thank you so much. Because you mentioned it, And because I can see, you talked about connectivity, I'd like to go to Faith next to get your reflections, Faith, please. A couple of things that really stood out for you in the report.
You want me to respond to?
Oh, wait, I'd like Faith to respond. You raised something very rightly about. You raised connectivity, Professor Mamela. So
yes, that's right. That's right.
And we have somebody here from the telco sector, so I thought it would be a great way to bring Faith in to share her reflections on something that you really pertinently raised, which is very rightly so.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate this invitation from HDIF and COSTECH. This is something very great, reviewing the report. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my views and takeouts from the report. Speaking from a telecom point of view, I would like to bring my comments based on the observations that I've actually seen in the market. The fact that I'm in the startup industry, I'm in the telco industry, and I work with financial institutions, the government, and various stakeholders in the market, especially in the innovation space. One of the things that even mentioned by the professor was research and development, and the lack of research and development means that availability of information becomes very scarce. And the lower the availability of information, then innovation will really not be able to scale as expected. A few things that I've actually kind of captured was more on information, and I think the part of research and development is very key. And also, I believe that there's a role that needs to be played. I recall one of the points mentioned by earlier was on with regard to who is to finance startups, who is to finance innovation. We can't just leave it with the government. We can't leave it with development partners, but it has to something to start from, I think, university level for start, and then it can go down to primary level of education, looking onto what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, and really building those environments that you can now be able to finance. Also, I would like to point out something with regard to policies. In a nutshell, I can say we're seeing startups. We're seeing startups actually bringing innovation, bringing disruption to businesses that can easily scale and grow fast. You can't compare that with an SME, but today in the market, in Tanzania environment, we kind of compare startups and SMEs as one thing. There's so much innovation coming with startups compared with SMEs, so we cannot put these things together in one bucket. So policies for startups, policies for SMEs, that needs to be kind of looked at so that we can really say, how do we finance SMEs? How do we finance a startup? And actually, it's not something that we should just depend on the government or local partners, development partners who are in country, but it's something that can be seen in a worldwide, like in a global perspective. Another point that I wanted to say, the look on incumbent companies, all these large organizations that has actually made us so used with the traditional ways of doing things. Startups brings innovation. So I think one of the responsibilities that big organizations, the telecoms, the banks, and other bigger corporate organizations, they need to look at is how do they enable local talents, local skills, the local startups, in order to support the digitization or the growth of innovation into all these areas. Sales is no longer the traditional sales. We have to look at the digital sales, digital marketing, the agri-tech. There's so many opportunities that are opening up, and innovation is needed. And we see this a lot with the youth who are now in so many universities across the market. And I believe if we give them an opportunity to be a part on looking onto different ways of doing things, digitizing things, and using their skills and the talent, because they have the energy and the ability to really explore, learn, research, and all that, so that they can be able to really succeed and bring innovation into play and into fully fledged. So just to summarize, I think important thing is availability of information about, okay, I'm a startup, where do I start, where do I go, who do I see, where do I start, and things like that. Policies, I think the innovation has to go hand in hand with the way we are seeing startups in Tanzania, because being in the telco, managing Tigo Pesa business, I see a lot of opportunity, a lot of young talents bringing solutions. However, the way it is being packaged is not really packaged to scale. It's not really packaged in a way that it can convince. It can convince for investment, it can convince for financing, it can convince for integration and all that. So there's I can say like an opportunity gap that is being missed, which we need to really look at it and define it and really build policies and guidelines that will really help these young talents and the innovation industry that is really coming up so fast, looking onto the trends on the reports. As you can see, the people are really putting so much into the hard work. People are working so hard. I have come across so many proposals, so many opportunities that will really change lives. And at the same time, looking at it is the packaging, the way we bring it to these incumbent companies, the way we bring it to the government, the way we bring it to development partners. There's an opportunity gap that is actually missing there, and we can explore it even in other discussions. How do we really help these startups, these young talents, in the way that whatever they are doing is going to be accepted, it's going to be welcomed, it's going to be nourished, and scaled from one point to another. And the last was
you said something right there that I don't even know who to go to next now, Faith. I don't know if I need to go to Jones. I don't know if I need to go to Salom. Like, you've said so many things. So I'm going to go to Salom first, and then I'm going to come to you, Jones. But I think, two things that Faith said that really stick out for me. One is the financing. So this year's report is how do we finance innovation? And every person we've had speaking said, who's supposed to be doing it? Where is it supposed to be going? How can we tap into it? What does this look like for us? And, Faith, you said it right. It's not just about the SMEs, right? It's about the startups as well. And so, Salom, can I go to you first to kind of start to address this question about the finance? Where is it going? Where should it be going? Should we be doing more, Salom, or is it enough? Are our startups just complaining for nothing? Or is there really a problem here? And then, Jones, I'm going to come to you next because so you have a Hub 255, which is working across the ecosystem with startups. And I think it would be great if you can then bring in the conversation of what your startups are experiencing, but also where do you see opportunities for startups within our ecosystem, and what roles do hubs and labs, what roles do really critical players within our ecosystem? What is this role that we have to play within our ranking, and what can we do? So Salom, and then into Jones, please.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks for having me. And I'm glad to be part of this awesome panel. So before I come to the whole idea of who will finance the innovation, I just want to say two things on the reflection of the report as your previous question. So I think it's always a good thing, it's a good sign to see when we climb our ranks above, because it's always a sign that there's something good that we're doing as a country. But at the same time, when the market gives us this type of reports with positive ranks, it's also a good sign for investors as well. So investors love good news, whether it's private equity, whether it's venture capital, whether it's FDIs, people love to hear good news, because good news is always a reflection that there's stability, there's fundamentals that are doing well in the market that will attract investments and good returns in the future. So I think it's a good thing to see ranks going up. But the question is, what do these ranks mean? If you are best ranked in the world, what does that mean to Tanzania? Or if you are ranked in the bottom 10, what does that mean as well to the country? So we need to translate that as we move further in our conversations. And then, of course, there's this question of missing data for some reason, I think is quite unfortunate. But again, I don't know. Maybe I should throw this challenge to the authors of the report, especially when it comes to the investment data. My understanding is some of the investment data that has been reported to be missing in the report is actually available in the market. So things such as the ratio between the market capitalization and the GDP, this data is available, is publicly available. The amount of investments through venture capital, this information is available. We have been tracking venture capital investments in Tanzania for the past 10 years. So information.
I think Salom is frozen. Maybe we can go to Jones while we figure out where Salom's gone. Jones, would you like to step in, please?
Sure, thanks. I will gladly take up the role. So first of all, thank you very much, HDIF, Costex, and everybody involved. To take on the first part of the question that was talking on reflection, I think a lot has been covered, but allow me to maybe touch on 5.25 in terms of patent familiarities. There is a room for patent statistics to be considered, but I think the channels to how do they get parts to end up on the sources that GII fetch from is something that we can definitely work on jointly as the ecosystem. Now, you've been asking on the role that the hubs could actually play as far as the growth of the ecosystem is concerned. I think the lack of skills or a gap that comes to skills and business acumen is key. So from its infant stage 10, 15 years ago, the community has been working very hard in terms of filling in the gaps that comes on entrepreneurship. As Salim was just touching on fundraising, a true startup, there are startups here that are overfunded, be from impact investments, some grants, or you name it. I completely agree with Salim that capital has not been a problem. And we as Hub 255, for example, deliberately, we've been shying away from grants and invites to apply for loans, you name it, because we want to prove that self-sustaining as a startup, it is possible. And we've been able to do so for the last 3 years. We kept the doors open, the lights on. The other role that I think hubs can still play on is when it comes to experiences. A lot of startups do miss structures that ends up being very problematic, especially between co-founders when it comes to agreements, or at least aligning their visions. And of course, growth challenges. You don't see that initially, but over the years, as soon as you start getting some sales, accounts getting some numbers, issues starts to rise, and then of course whatever innovation a startup was working on ends up not being a benefit to the wider community. I would have loved, I don't know why I was very late into contributing this factor, to have a legal person on the board, because if you look at the legal investment and compliance sector, which we do kind of help as hubs to assist as far as the growth is concerned, it does require special attentions with startups. And I know we classify small, medium-sized enterprises being grouped on startups, but when you're looking at startup disease, even within startups, there are a lot of other sub classification that needs to be done. And of course, the rest are known, like to have the like-minded mindsets, some social obligation, market and ecosystem awareness, and of course, the usual space to work on, equipment, connectivity. This has been part of the role that Hubs has been playing, and they continue playing at the moment.
Thank you so much, Jones. Salom, you're back. Would you like to finish up?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, maybe I should not talk about the report. It was a sabotage. So let me just go straight to your question in terms of financing. So innovation, to be honest, requires innovative ways of financing. There's no way you can finance innovation by using the traditional sources of financing. Don't talk about banks in the equation unless banks, bid something on the side that will probably be focusing on financing innovation, but not using traditional balance sheet of banks to finance innovation. That won't happen, and don't even cry for that. So what we need to do is to grow and nurture alternative sources of financing, which of course will respond to what are the needs of innovation. Because innovation, as we see it, is split. We see innovation driven by entrepreneurs through startups. We see innovation driven by corporates through R&D and other institutions as well. We see innovation driven by academia, whether it's universities and other research institutions. But we also see innovation driven by NGOs, which, if you ask me, I would say, okay, this has been a sweet spot for majority of development partners, providing grants to NGOs probably to do some innovation in the socio-economic space, which would probably need to change, and the thinking should not be about NGOs, and the thinking should go straight to social enterprises, type of organizations that can scale, because scaling an NGO is a myth. You can only scale a social enterprise. So what can we do in the market? Of course, the report says clearly, we need to develop all these different forms of financing, from venture capital, private equity, if it's crowdfunding, to all these other spectrum of financing which we usually don't see in the market. So Tanzania in particular, we are at the very nascent stage in terms of developing all these different forms of financing. Just to update the panel or other people in the webinar, we have few developments in the market already. If you compare 5 years ago and where we are today, over the past 5 years, we have seen venture capital investments in Tanzania in excess of $200 million. So there is financing coming to the market. In terms of angel investors who tend to finance early stage businesses, that would probably the traditional graduates of Hubs from Mr. Jones. These are type of businesses which are in most cases pre-seed to seed stage. Some don't have revenue. Some probably only have a prototype they need to validate to commercialize. So all these type of ventures probably need people like angel investors. So we launched an angel network 2 years ago, where it's a culture that we're still building, because we believe we can tap local capital that we can allocate for companies. In most cases, you see the majority of venture capital is coming down to Africa. Unfortunately, is not local capital. And when it's not local capital, tends to have sort of foreign behavior when it comes to financing. 40% of all the venture capital money you see coming to Africa comes from the US, and more than 30–40%, of course, come from Europe. So if this is the type of funds that are coming to the market, the type of financing that will go to innovation won't necessarily be locally driven. This will come with a Silicon Valley type of thinking, and as a result, majority of entrepreneurs who are innovating won't be able to access this type of financing. Go to Kenya. Kenya is the leading recipient of venture capital money in East Africa. But the money that goes to local founders who are innovating is only 7%. So we're talking about more than $1.5 billion. It was only 7% going to local innovators. So what does it mean? It means we need to have innovation and funds that are innovated locally to finance the type of innovation which are grown from the backyard. And who should do that? So we have different players who can do different roles. One is the typical venture capital investors in private equity, whether it's local, whether it's foreign, but they have their role to play. But these are type of investment which would tend to go at a growth stage of a company. The company which has revenue, it has growth scale. Secondly, of course, is angel investors. If you ask me, I'll tell you we need local source of financing. So people like Dr. Flora, who is a diaspora, sending money back home. How can we tap 10% of our remittances every year to finance startups? Because to be honest with you, we receive 1 trillion shillings every year as remittances. But most of this money is spent on non-productive activities. Of course, some are very critical, healthcare, education, housing. but how can we tap at least part of that money and allocate it for startup financing and financing innovation in this country? So there's a key role that we can use. Tanzanians in Tanzania who are living in the country, living outside the country, foreigners living in Tanzania who would probably want to use part of their annual earnings and finance this type of.
Thank you so much, Salom.
Just two things. One is the government. I'll just talk about the government, because the government has a critical role to play in this space. We see governments always coming up with funds. And of course, the government currently has more than 42 funds. How can we, rip apart only 10 funds and put one huge fund that can be dedicated for financing innovation, and leave the rest of the funds probably to do whatever that they're doing? And currently, of course, the other thing that we are struggling with is how can we use the money from development partners to unlock and to de-risk these startups to attract private money. So currently, I'm involved with my other colleague, working with the UNDP, and of course with my colleagues from HDIF, COSTECH, and DFID to develop an innovation fund that will be used as a catalytic fund to finance early stage startups, to unlock them to attract private money, say 3-4 years down the road. So these are some of the things that we can use in some of the structures. Of course, universities have a huge role to play. If you go to other markets, universities have endowment funds. They can take 10% of the endowment funds and finance all these innovations that we see in the market. So if it is Nelson Mandela University, probably they can have an innovation fund, or they can have an endowment fund and use 10% of that money to finance innovators who are graduating from the university, coming to the market, who later down the stream, they can be picked up by people like ourselves to give them the commercial capital that they needed to grow and scale.
Thank you so much, Salom. I'm just going to let you know that there's a lot more questions coming your way around funding. The questions are piling up, and a lot of it is really based around seed funding and what does it look like. And like you said, patient, long capital, patient capital, things that are responsive to our needs. So now that you've got Flores 10%, that's going to come back. Flora, you're in a unique position in Namibia and as a director of SAIS, because you have this bird's eye view of the continent, right? And your experience in Tanzania coupled with your bird's eye view, what do you think we need to do to improve our policy environment to nurture more innovation? But also, if we think about the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, we're part of SADC, we're part of the EAC, we want our innovators to be able to cross borders. Right? We want them to be able to work in new markets, to have products in new markets. So what should be our priorities for regional integration when it comes to allowing innovations to scale across borders?
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, HDIF, and thank you, COSTECH. It's really good to actually be talking to partners, fellow colleagues, and a lot of people from the ecosystem in Tanzania that I have in one way or the other touched base on a couple of things. So sitting in Namibia, working on a regional program that is funded in 5 different countries, that's Botswana, Tanzania, South Africa, Zambia, and Namibia, of course. Our main focus is collaboration. And Tanzania in this collaboration sits in a unique position because Tanzania is part of the East African community, it's part of SADC, it's works very well with COMESA. So at some point you start to think, where are your loyalties placed and how do you get around this? But not to speak along the government political agenda, it just gives Tanzania, in my opinion, a better opportunity to share the wealth and also benefit from the wealth of innovations coming from the other countries. So just to give you an example of one of the projects that we are supporting and trying to unlock these barriers of collaboration between countries, moving an innovation from Tanzania that was supported by HDIF and is now being scaled into Zambia, the water filter by Nelson Mandela University. So there are a number of initiatives that are done, but one thing I will just point out and say that is key, and what we've seen for the projects that we're supporting in Tanzania, is the capacity, the understanding by the innovators of what it really takes to scale a business. And not because they don't want to, but it's just the supporting infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, I mean the capacity of the multipliers, such as the hubs. So Hub 55, I'm not trying to dig at you, but we've seen that there is opportunity for improving your
capacity for delivery of the services that the startups and the entrepreneurs that you support need. And we see a bigger value in mentorship, and mentorship not necessarily on just the technical aspects, but really on how do you see a long-term business grow. One thing that we find might be a limitation. We look at a local market or a market around us, and we fail to recognize that the potential for our product or prototype or idea, or is it a curriculum, to really move and transform a place that is not necessarily just under our noses. And so we think these are areas for me as a Tanzanian sitting out here, I would really want to push Tanzanians to see beyond the Tanzanian borders. A lot of the products that are coming out, a lot of the innovations that are coming out of Tanzania will make leaps and bounds in the surrounding economies. I wanted to point out something that Tanzania should do in trying to get to this point is consider a lot more foresight ability, and not foresight ability just in the Planning Commission where it's very well done at a national level, but really on a local scale, down with local government authorities. And SAIS as a program is launching an initiative. In fact, next week we start an online webinar with COSTECH as our partner for Tanzania to try and help local government authorities try and set trends. Where is the market going? How can they grow their businesses, and how can they actually improve the support that they provide to the innovators if they have any in the region? And how do they adapt and take up the products that are coming from the innovation? One thing I'd also like to just support what Jones and I think Salum has also said, money is not a problem. What we have found that the innovators really need is these capacity structures, understanding of business, the legal aspects, the understanding of intellectual property. You would be amazed, we have even universities that didn't quite understand the implications of the IP that they hold and how to negotiate using IP, more importantly, when they have foreign partners or even when they have cross-border partners. How do you really see the value of IP? How do you protect it? And how do you translate it into resources and money? And so there are a number of things that I think Tanzania is working very well, and I'm really happy to see this report. But just to say that the report has been based, as we've been told, on 2018 statistics. And so we have been 2 years into this, and we've been working hard. So I think Tanzania should be looking at jumping another 12 places if possible, because there's a lot of amazing things that has been happening. I've been watching from the outside thinking, wow, I should go back home tomorrow because I don't want to miss the party. But yeah, back to you.
Thank you so much, Flora. So much to unpack. And I'm not going to read some of the chat stuff is for you and some is for Salum. Just the need to looking beyond national borders, really important. And you broke it down for us. A lot of startups are saying there's no money. So I'm hoping that all the startups that are on the call this afternoon are really, really taking notes, but also they can reach out to any one of our panelists. And I'd like to jump into questions. I'm going to say we have over 20 questions at this point. Some of them have been answered, and some of them will get right into it. And so please feel free, if you feel like this is your question, please feel free to jump in and answer. So one of them around human capital, which, we've seen the report has said this is a really weak area for Tanzania. So human capital came out as a critical challenge in the report. How can we encourage innovation at primary and secondary school level? And do primary school and secondary school teachers have the skills to empower our children?
Hello.
Professor Momela, are you still with us, sir?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I think there is a lot that can be done to kind of inculcate a culture of thinking innovatively right from the lowest level. And I've been thinking recently of how this could be done. If we train our people right from the beginning to always be inquisitive and to question what is it that can be done better, what is it that at all levels, I think it is possible to succeed. But most important, I think it is important we include in the curricula at all levels, right from primary school, training on innovation and entrepreneurship. And because I think that is very, very important. If our school kids are able to develop innovative thinking, always to think that there is something I can do to make this better, and then coupled with entrepreneur, there is always something I can do to make money out of this. I think if this is at all levels, then of course there is going to be improvement. Currently, even innovation training and entrepreneurship, there is entrepreneurship training at tertiary education universities, but not to the level that one would have liked to see. There isn't much of innovation training to say, I think at almost all levels. And I would personally like to see more training carried out in form of short courses and even long-term courses right from the lowest level. And of course, it means being able to design the training such that it suits that level. But I think if that is done, there is going to be improvement. Of course, it is a process. In the long run, there's going to be improvement. So I think there is something that can be done in that area. And I would like to challenge my colleagues at universities and other higher learning institutions to ensure that they make innovation and entrepreneurship training compulsory. Let it be a cross-cutting kind of training. And it is going to help.
Thank you so much, Professor Momila. So we're really going back to the basics, right? So including innovation in our education systems at multiple levels, not just via incubators and in hubs within universities, but really looking at developing a strong pipeline of skills and human capital. Thank you very much. So we have several questions actually that have come up in terms of rural innovation. How can innovations be supported in rural areas? What are we thinking? What are we talking about? What does this look like? How can we raise innovation levels and raise our ranking is one of the questions by including communities and groups of people that we otherwise don't build for. So, who would like to take on that that question? Who's taking the lead in promoting and supporting grassroots innovations in Tanzania? Who should be doing it? Jones, are you?
I can jump in. I can jump in from the market, thinking, not necessarily from the traditional, routes to do that. So let's talk of hubs, for instance. I don't know how many hubs in Tanzania are allocated in these areas. So all the hubs we see are in cities, in major towns. So I think the first thing that we need to look at is how can we allocate some of these hubs, go to these areas. And because some of these hubs are financed by development partners, let's put in a condition that, okay, guess what? For every 2 hubs we have in cities, probably we should have 1 hub in the rural area. So if we finance 50 hubs in cities.
Example, our labs in Iringa, grassroots, working with communities in Iringa. We have hubs sitting in Mbeya, we have hubs in Dodoma. So we need to think about, like you're saying, rightly saying, refocusing where we put our money, where we put our talent, where we're growing the skill.
Yeah.
Thank you. So another big question that has come up is around patenting. And what does this look like? And how do we move the needle on patenting and IP, which is something, again, that came up in one of our weaknesses in the report. So how can we turn this gap into an opportunity? What do we need to look at now to move that needle forward for us? And Dr. Nungu, I know you're not on the panel, but if you'd like to jump in as well and share some of what COSTECH is doing, we would be really happy to hear that as well.
May I say something?
Would anyone like to jump in on IP?
Catherine?
Yes?
Can I?
Yes, please, Dr. Flora.
So, and I'll share this experience of patenting at the time when I was at COSTECH, and I still share the same opinion, and I found the same feeling as part of the region here, because you will recognize, with the exception of South Africa, there's not a lot of not a lot of patents that are coming out of this part of the world. And the reason is why, the first question is, why should we patent, and how does patent translate into wealth and socioeconomic development? So once you get over that hurdle, you find that these countries find better value in licensing than it is with just having a patent. If you can't commercialize your patent, then it becomes a trophy on the wall that you can't really use. And not to say that patents aren't important, and TISC, that is run by COSTECH, at least for Tanzania, WIPO has put in a lot of effort in training and capacitating the region, and Tanzania in particular, because I've attended quite a few of the awareness that they have done for the country, in trying to transform the thinking of how do you go through a patent. A patent development process is quite lengthy, it's quite tedious. Very few of our universities in Tanzania have really the facilities to allow one to properly patent and then protect and then commercialize. So seeing our growth, what we need to focus on, in my opinion, and probably this is an opinion that's shared by a few others, that let's focus on the development. Let's focus on getting things out there. Tanzania, like many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, have been traditionally driven by public sector financed research. And so what you develop is for the public good. So when I'm doing research as a scientist, I'm developing a product that I can immediately see the farmer utilizing tomorrow. I will not be thinking of how do I protect this before it gets to the market so that I can commercialize it. So there's a whole growth in that pipeline that needs to be reformulated to allow the levels of patents to increase. And it's also based on our where we're coming from, the social system of our government. The patenting is a very capitalistic driven way of protecting your knowledge and IP. And that's why if you refer to my earlier comment, I said for this part of the world, IP, negotiation of IP, how we enter into businesses and how we negotiate this really needs a lot of support and growth and understanding of what the implications of this are. Those would be my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. John, I saw you nodding. Do you want to share? Yes, please.
If I can chip in, I think we need to start looking at patents, as Dr. Fola is saying, as a potential enemy to innovations, right? If you look at all these advanced markets, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that even have an attempt of some of, how do I put this? Patent application, if you leave alone like industrial design, utility modules application, you would see a lot of NPEs, non-practicing entities, applying for patents just to charge fees when actual utilization is needed. Even in Tanzania, one of the biggest KCM copyrights, we can only fight Amisi and Damwene vis-a-vis MIC. I'm glad we have some people from Tigray. It goes down to who actually had a copyright to those materials. We need to go back to the basics. Tanzania right now, top of the head, has about 4 or 5 rows that looks at patents and copyright. So the 1986 Trade and Service Mark Act, the Copyright Neighborhood of, think of 1999, the Patent Registration Act, the Industrial Property Act of 2008, and I think the Intellectual Property Rights in Tanzania of 2010, which is like the most modern, but all of these have conflicts. We actually had a very lengthy session here, and we realized the patent route might be an enemy to Tanzania innovation.
So what I'm hearing, Jones, is you've identified the stumbling block and potentially the opportunity to streamline some of those to really create a document that will move the needle forward for us. Thank you, Flora and Jones.
I think there is
a couple of questions that have come in around, well, one of them in the chat. Sorry, I'm just gonna. One for the funding gap. So I just wanted to, Salom, this one is for you. Like I said, there's 2 actually. One is around tax relief for innovation companies in Tanzania, right? So potential does that exist? You know, what does it look like? What could it look like potentially? And then the other question is about the valley of death, and that the funding gap in Tanzania, from an entrepreneur's perspective especially, is at the seed or early stage funding, as was defined in the report as well. And so where startups are having to navigate the valley of death. And so we're looking at, Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenyan startups getting more mileage in this area. So what the question is asking is, what is the Tanzanian solution to this? What does this look like? And how can we change this?
So I think the tax relief thing is part of improving the business environment for startup, and I think is one of the core functions of the newly launched the Startup Association, and I'm pleased to see Faith here as a board member. So this is part of their work, and I think one of the agenda of the association actually is to see how can Tanzania also join other African countries that are launching the Startup Act, which was originally launched in Tunisia. And the act speaks about all these things. So from taxes to all other things that can unlock the market in terms of growing startups, at the same time, attracting more investments coming to the startups. So tax is one of the areas where we have spoken a lot. Actually, we have a dossier of proposals on tax regime in Tanzania that has been submitted to the government as we speak in areas where we think can help, direct taxes and indirect taxes. So it's an area that is a work in progress, but I strongly in agreement with the idea that we need to work on the tax regime that is very specific for supporting startups. So one of the things that, of course, could be part in the Startup Act is to provide income tax relief in the first 10 years of these startups. Two is to allow, if there's a venture capital investor investing in a startup, normally when you're exiting the investment, you are exposed to capital gain tax. So again, we are proposing if the government can at least provide some relief on the capital gain tax. This will attract Tanzania as a destination for private equity investments in comparison to other markets across Africa. But at the same time, if the startup uses part of its revenue for bootstrapping, if you don't tax it, that means they have more retained earnings that can be plowed back to the company and they can quicken their growth over time. Unlike when the government takes away 30% of the revenue every year, that slows down the growth of the startup. On the issue of value of death, again, as I said earlier, this is a space for homegrown, financing instruments. So if it's an angel investor, someone who understands the local environment, you don't expect someone from London to invest in a business which is in the valley of death because they don't understand the local environment very well. So this must be done by local capital, as I said earlier, whether it's venture capital, angel investing, whether it's crowdfunding, which can crowd funds from hundreds and thousands of Tanzanians who understand the environment very well. But again, this is an area where the development partners can come in by using grant to de-risk these companies at growth at a valley of death, so that they can use the grant either to validate their innovations, to commercialize their validation, and at least move out of the valley of death. And the 3 years down the road, they will be attractive for private money to come in. So all the grant money that we see in the country can be used as a catalytic source of financing to help startups be attractive to private money that can come and fill the funding gap for companies that develop them.
Thank you so much, Salum. So there's been an ongoing discussion with panelists, and I'm going to bring that up. And one of our participants today has asked, why can't publicly funded research be used to create publicly held commercial products? And we've been asked to actually bring this to the panel. So I'm just going to say that, why can't publicly funded research be used to create publicly funded held commercialized products? Flora, would you like to jump onto that, and then maybe Faith as well before we go into the others?
So just my experience, having also been in an academic institution, publicly funded, using publicly funded money, the products that you develop can't be commercialized for profit immediately, because the money comes with requirements. So ethically, you've used taxpayers' money, you cannot make a business out of it. I mean, just for ethical purposes. However, in addition to that, you also have a lot of the public funding money, especially for countries like Tanzania, come from development partners. And so they have the equity clauses. They have equity clauses meaning that they don't take equity, but they want the outputs of the research to go to benefit and enhance the livelihood of the public. So if you transform that into a business, you sort of cut off the main reason of why this business should come out. However, there are cases, and a good example is Statoil and the big oil company that Norway has set up. The government set up a company, a publicly funded company, to do research and commercialize the outputs of that. So if it's done at a government level, like probably, and I can't say this, I was watching the social media and saying, wow, there's a lot of findings from mining. If government can convert that and make it public, a public business for research and development, then you can commercialize it, because then you have a downstream, or everybody benefits from the profits that come out of it. But as individual startups, it becomes very difficult that if you use your thesis money and transform that into a commercial business, that shouldn't be allowed, and universities struggle with that.
Professor Momila, would you care to share any experiences you've had around this?
I think I'll put it this way: it's publicly funded research, and say it comes through the university, and there is the possibility for the university, depending on the policies they have in place, to commercialize the product. And I know there are efforts in some universities, there are mechanisms in some universities to do that. The extent to which they have succeeded is something that I am not sure of. It has not been as easy, but of course, I know there have been a few cases. There have been a few cases where we have patents on products which have been generated by public funds directed to research. It is possible, but maybe it is not being done to the extent that one can say pride oneself with.
Thank you very much. Faith, something to add?
Thank you so much. Actually, one thing that I wanted to add is that a lot of public information or information that has been gathered from public funded or donor funded projects, I think there's a lot of room that information can be used for the benefit of the public. And I think in building proper frameworks, structures and policies and guidelines to really enable, like, not really the government, but sort of private public sector to utilize this information for the benefit of the entire public or entire community. I think that's a comment that I can give that, because I've seen a lot in agriculture. There's a lot of information being held at different levels, from local government to municipals and all that. And I think that information, if it could be used, it could have bring more social and economic impact to the society than just being kept somewhere and it's just kept, like, in a library or something like that. Thank you.
Faith, would you care to share some of the experiences really quickly around Kilimo Fresh and how you've been able to remove those obstacles per se to be able to grow the business?
So just to brief on Kilimo Fresh, it's something that starts with an idea. That's why I tried so much to tell a lot of startups is how you package your business. Because one thing of this, of the initial agreement that we had with my partner was to make sure that we put scaling at every stage of what we want to achieve. So it's not like just a beautiful idea that we wanted to implement. There are a lot of similar ideas in the market. There are a lot of companies doing the same thing in the market. But one of the things that we put first was how do we scale at every stage and making sure that we bring our business out there, so for it to be seen, not to be seen and to be accepted. And I think that's one of the things that has really helped us to get to where we are right now. And I know there's a lot of comments based on the comment I made on packaging. Trust me, packaging is very, very important for startups. I lived in Nigeria for 4 years. I have seen startups starting from $0 to $8 million funded in less than 1 year. And one thing that I got from that was packaging. How do you package a startup to an incubant company? How do you package your financial service or a financial disruptive product to a bank, to a telco? There's a very huge opportunity that most startups are missing there. And you present your proposal, they listen to you. In the next 2-3 months, they put it aside. That's what is actually happening so much. And I think that gap, I don't have all the answers right now, but it's something we need to really explore, the opportunity gap. Why do we move from idea to go to market products? Why do we just looking onto a solution that we developed is still with us for years, and it's really not gone to market? And the only thing you need in it is one incumbent company to help you scale. So if that gap we need to really look at, and it's not something we can discuss right now and finish it, but based on my experience, that's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith, and thank you so much to our panelists today, Dr. Flora, Salam Awad, Faith Pella, Professor Mamila, and Jones Mrusha, really for, I think, even though we talked about the weaknesses, what I heard was opportunity, opportunity, opportunity to move the needle forward. And I think really it's up to us sitting on this call and the wider innovation community to think about how we take that next step. And so on that note, I would like to invite Mr. Mark Serekore, who is the Senior Director, Department for Africa and Least Developed Countries at WIPO. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to congratulate you, and I was very honored to participate in this meeting. When I came to the meeting, I was coming to just for the celebration of this Tanzania, move. But I realized that at the end of the day, I was a student, and I learned a lot from you, and I've been very educated by what you said. And for me as a director, if you permit me, let me take a spoon of pride from you, because you're celebrating, so I want to be part of this celebration, and very proud of what is going on in Africa. When you're in WIPO in Geneva, to be frank and to be honest with you, I didn't think that there is such a huge potential in terms of knowledge and also brand in Africa. So I've been very educated, and I took it for my own. And I came for the celebration, but I realized that the celebration is also part of another way to think about the future, and it's what you're doing. And I realized that above the celebration, we are just more brainstorming with a concrete proposal, and I think this is what I appreciate a lot. So I won't be long, because I think that everything has been said. I just want to thank all the organizers. I thank all the COSTECH and also the Human Development Innovation Fund and all the participants. And when I say all the participants, for your contribution, but I'm thinking also about the contribution of the government, in fact, because it's the government who has to develop the policy and so on. But I think that we should continue to discuss. You mentioned the way forward. You were speaking about the innovation ecosystem. What we are doing in WIPO is, of course, innovation ecosystem, but you mentioned what we call innovation ecosystem architecture, because you have to develop it to make the streamline innovation in all what you're doing. And I think that I learned a lot what can be done. And thank you very much for this education and this knowledge sharing. So thank you very much. Flora, I did really appreciate. I was asking if you were an expert in IP, or I don't know, but I've been very impressed with knowledge and IP. And I think that in the near future, we'll maybe get in touch with you to promote IP also in Africa, because you mentioned, as well as John's, because you mentioned also how IP can be very important for development. You're speaking about innovation is important for Tanzania, but also for Africa. And celebrating this today is Africa. We show to African country that is possible. That is possible. This is possible in Tanzania, it's possible to also for other countries in Africa. It's just a matter of organizing ourselves and put the necessary means and action in the thing. And it's important for Tanzania, because you are now in what you call in this free trade zone. And I think that speaking about innovation is IP, but is a value addition, is a value chain. And I think that being at this level of innovation gives you this advantage to integrate this after. and I think it's a comparative advantage we have. So just continue. WIPO will be always there available to assist you. I will discuss later on with the organizer to see if really we can work together to establish what I call innovation ecosystem architecture, because this is the most important thing. And I think that all of you mentioned it, so you have to see how to do it, how to develop this interaction between all the actors, and then bring innovation in a very strategic, sector in Tanzania. So thank you very much, and my congratulations. I'm very impressed, and I think I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Asante sana, merci beaucoup, Mr. Serekore.
Okay.
And I would now like to invite someone who snuck in during our session, the head of PSD at UNDP, Emmanuel Nko. Would you like to please say a few words?
Thank you very much, Catherine. First of all, thank all the keynote speakers, the panelists, as well as the active participants. To me, you have done an outstanding job sharing with audience your valuable knowledge, insights, and experience on how to move the innovation in Tanzania to climb the more ranking in the future Global Innovation Index. Thank you very much. From UNDP, we are very impressed and moved with the ranking of Tanzania in the Global Innovation Index. And it comes at the right time where UNDP is full-fledged getting to the innovation sector in Tanzania. We are putting together a 5 years innovation program, which will be addressing more of the area which have been shared by previous speaker. Salumu have mentioned one on the catalytic fund, but also there is a component of strengthening the conducive business environments, which will take care on the issues related to IP, but also all issues related to finance and the like. But also more important is on the strengthening the ecosystem itself, whereby supporting the hubs and moving the innovation to the grassroots, whereby it's one of the area which we didn't done very well in the report. So with these few words, let me once again express my sincere thanks to all of you who have coming for this and contribute to this discussion, but equally important, those who are playing a big role to put Tanzania in the map, especially in the innovation ecosystem. Equally important, from UNDP, we put our commitment that we'll continue support the innovation ecosystem and also collaborating with all partners. So once again, thank you very much, and I wish you a very fruitful day. Thank you. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Just a couple of announcements before we go home back to COSTECH. There's been a lot of questions that have come up from today's session. A lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of people that want to probe further and dig deeper and figure out how we can, really capitalize on these opportunities. So we are going to have further sessions. Please stay tuned for this. We are going to be taking this conversation further and really seeing how, once again, how we can really, as Mr. Serekore said, we are an example, really. So how do we capitalize on this space and really push ourselves to be an even better example than we already are? I'd like to thank all our participants for being here with us this afternoon. You've had some incredible insights that you've given us. And you've really brought to the forefront where we excel and where the gaps are. So I would like to bring Joseph on board. Thank you so much, Joseph, for joining us. I will give Joseph the mic now.
Thanks, Catherine. Actually, I was just coming up just to see Dr. Nungu close the session for us. So Dr. Nungu, that's not mine. Thank you.
Oh, it was a wonderful discussion, and I enjoyed as well, as Mark said. Seems we need more of such discussions in the near future. There is a lot to discuss, a lot to share, to learn. But best of all, I trust, by the discussion, all partners are working together. All partners everybody wants to see us moving forward, jumping up in the ladder. But most importantly, they wanted to see outputs, tangible things. So this goes in line with the industrialization agenda in Tanzania, because if the innovation is up to the mark, then we know our industries, will have the best solutions relevant for the current need. So thank you again, everybody, the panelists, the participants, and I trust this is the beginning of a series of similar webinars. We'll work with HDIF to make sure it is happening, because we can see, how important it is. And I can see online we have at least 63 participants. So it seems, people are eager, they are willing, they are ready to attend, to listen, to ask a question, to share. So thank you all. Asanteni sana, karibuni sana, nawatakia jioni njema. Asanteni. Back to you.
Asante sana Dr. Nungu.